When I decided to move from, after nearly half a century of research to literature, what I really want to do is become an intellectual smuggler. To smuggle really information that I think is important, that has something to do with science, not necessarily just science itself, but how one conducts science, the behavior of scientists, the tribal behavior of them, to a general public that is either not interested, afraid, or simply think they don't understand it. So instead of telling them, I'm going to give you a lecture, or write an article, or a book, and they'll say, come to play, or come read a novel. And that novel and the play have to be interesting and gripping, if you wish, on its own merits. I'm hiding in it things in that fiction. That's why I call it science in fiction, or science in theater, as compared to just science fiction or just any theatrical play, where I'm putting these nuggets of hidden information accurately and precisely in there. And they hope that they get engaged by the play or the novel, but then they'll learn something in the process. And one cannot admit this ahead of time, because the word didactic is an insulting word in the theater or in fiction. They really say something that's didactic and dismiss it. Well, of course they're wrong, because if you really think that you'll stop learning at age 18 or 22, and from then on just remain uneducated, you're an idiot. But this has to be done palatably, interestingly, engagingly, and hiddenly. And that's what I've really been trying to do in my literary thing, in particular in the theater, because theater has a great advantage. These are real case histories. So you're describing, whatever you want to describe, you're describing in the context of living persons who are acting it out in front of you. And what is even more important, in contrast to film, where film is always completely identical, irrespective of where you show it, you can adapt it to the cultural situation, be it the region of the country or even the different countries. My plays have been translated to 20 languages cumulatively, so I performed in many different countries, and I've adapted a number of them to their local situation. Well, I did it because this struck me as an example of a field that is, in terms of explaining it, is fairly simple. Everyone understands a bubble. If I want to talk about chemistry, I'd have to talk about chemical formulas, chemical structures. So in bubbles you don't. Just like in my very first play, I dealt with reproduction, I dealt with a sperm and an egg, even though I use technical terms. That means something to people. If I say perhydrocyclopentene or phenanthrene, it means nothing to people. So I'm just giving you an example. So I picked that because even a kid could understand bubbles, but they have a misconception. I mean, as I'm pointing out here, this goes all the way to astrophysics and cosmology and quantum foam and really almost the origin of the universe, if you really carry it that far. And the mathematics is extremely complicated, of bubble formation, bubble aggregation, speed of bubbling, and things like this, all of which is really important if you drink a glass of champagne. You're interested in the bubbles, the number of bubbles, how they appear, and so on. Yeah. So that I thought was a good topic to illustrate the various things that I want to do, including fashion in science, because that is not a fashionable area, not considered a fashionable area by most scientists. And yes, yet in fact can be, if you really understand it. Well, fashion in anything, whether it's fashion in science, whether it's fashion in art, whether it's fashion in literature, in any creative work, in music, unfortunately, affects greatly the receptivity of your work, you the creator now, in a given cultural context. If I write music that would be considered in the style of, I don't know, Haydn or Handel and something like this, it'll not be considered fashionable without any question, and will be considered simply imitation or working in a field that is just not of any relevance. It's the same thing with art, of course, and it's also true in science. But in addition, in science, because it is coupled with the evaluation of you, which is not an evaluation of the marketplace, like selling a picture or selling a book. In this case, it's your profession, your tenure, your employment, which is judged on the basis of your research by your peers. And if they do not consider it fashionable, they're frequently, not always, disregarded or considered diminished and not worthwhile for promotion. And in my play, where I deal with champagne, especially also beer, and the chairman's department is beer. I mean, you can go and get 10 in a brewery, but in chemistry, and you know, I'm bringing this up. Yeah. Well, I chose ambiguity because that happens to be my nature. I think that every play that I've written, and this is my 9th play for the commercial theater, ends on an ambiguous note. I do not, even though in the classic answer, the classic theater, Shakespeare, to give you an end, preferably a good end, but sometimes bad, but a clear-cut one. I do not like to do it. And that is precisely because my purpose initially in going into playwriting was to present the audience with problems. I consider them social, cultural problems, and they really have to be answered by the individual, not by me. I should not give them my opinion, because that's only my personal opinion. I would like them to think about this and come up with their own opinion, and that invariably involves coming up with an alternative ending. I'll give an example. I still teach at Stanford University in the winter, and I teach a seminar on science and theater. And one of the things the students have to do, they have to read some of the major plays. Let's take Copenhagen by Michael Frayn, Arcadia by Tom Stoppard, take 2 famous British plays. One thing they have to do, they have to remove the last 4 or 5 pages and write a new ending. It's not easy, but a new ending, because I'm interested in their opinion, how to evaluate, sum up the material that was presented by a very important, intelligent playwright. But the playwrights in that case gave you the answer in some cases, and I do not want to give them the complete answer. And that was the reason here, but it's true of essentially every one of my plays.